Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
You ask any Canadian, and they will have a horror story of air travel in Canada. Whether that be a cancelled flight that didn't get rebooked until 3 days later, or a lost bag situation with little to no help from an airline's AI customer service line. Yeah, everyone has a personal story. And the experience of air travel in Canada doesn't seem to be getting any better or any cheaper for that matter. And unless you live in a big city, what other options do you have besides Air Canada or WestJet? Although the Carney government has made recent moves to allow foreign investment into our aviation sector, we still have an outdated model that, at the end of the day, comes at the cost of the everyday Canadian who simply wants to get from point A to point B. So where can the government focus its funds to ensure passenger safety and experience doesn't fall to the wayside of lining the pockets of airline CEOs? And what regulations need to be put in place so you can actually stretch your legs out on a plane without touching those of the person in front of you? I'm Maria Kestane, and today on The Big Story, we're talking to aviation expert and professor at McGill University, John Gradek, to discuss the current decline of the state of Canadian air travel experience and how, if possible, we can get to a place where the current airline duopoly doesn't plague the luxury of traveling. John, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to talk to you, and a very, very interesting subject.
John, in your opinion, when was Canadian air travel at its peak, and what made it that way, you think?
Oh, my goodness. Interesting question. At its peak, we'll have to kind of make sure we define what the peak means. It means peak in terms of customer service, or peak in terms of number of carriers, or peak in terms of the number of markets being served. So for the sake of simplicity, I'll just talk about service. So I've been around this business for close to 50 years. So I've seen it come and go. I was, one of my first assignments in Air Canada when I joined Air Canada was to get on board the 747 and to experience the upper deck of the 747 with the piano and the dance bar, sitting on that airplane. And it was an amazing experience. Something that I had heard about, never thought I'd ever see it. And it was something that differentiated Air Canada from the rest of the marketplace in terms of what they've done to kind of differentiate the airplane, differentiate the airline from the marketplace. The next big travel experience I went through was with Ward Air. And the Ward Airs of this world kind of, to me, created the benchmark for Canadian service. Flying on those Ward Air airplanes, and you had china, you had glassware, you had, cutlery, steel cutlery, and you had, table service. You had in economy class. This is economy, not first, not business. In economy class. So Ward Air, to me, kind of was, the epitome of customer service in Canada. So what happened? Things kind of went a little sideways. We deregulated the Canadian travel industry back in the late 80s, early 90s, took regulation off, let the carriers decide for themselves what they felt was the right way to go in terms of going after market share and going after pricing, going after presence in the marketplace. And so there was a lot of, I would call it, destructive competition. A lot of carriers went by the wayside as a result of competition being put by the major carriers that we had in Canada at the time, which were carriers like Canadian Airlines or CP Air and Air Canada at that time as well. So Ward Air disappeared. And it was competition that really drove Ward Air. Couldn't afford to do all the things that they were doing. Pricing was much more predominant rather than service. Everybody was trying to reduce their costs. And as a result of that cost differentiation and that cost pressure, service took a back seat. That's the decline of service. And so the financial, the oil crisis in '79, the financial pandemic, or the issues we had in the financial crisis in 2008, drove carriers nuts in terms of their ability to price themselves. This has been a low margin business for years. Since deregulation, I think that carriers in Canada, and I would say around the world, usually have about 2 to 3% margin, which I've worked in the rail industry in part of my career. And if we had margins below 35%, the sky was falling. So in the airline industry, margins are currently at 2 to 3%. So this is like the retail food industry. So there's not a lot of margins in airline business. I have no idea why anybody would want to invest in an airline because there's no money to be had. The fastest way to make $1 million in the airline business is to start with 10 million, and you'll make $1 million eventually. So the industry is not structured in a way that it is profitable. It's not sustainable in the long run, and service has taken a backseat.
For the better part of the last decade, as social media has really provided everyday people a platform to storytell, we've been seeing more and more, stories of just like abysmal experiences at, airports, with air travel experiences, whether that be, losing luggages or random fees for literally just existing, poor customer service. I mean, what do you think has contributed to the state of Canadian air travel today?
I think that when you look at the experiences that Canadians have gone through in terms of there's two things. There's civility on board airplanes, and people are getting more and more aggressive on airplanes. And the question is, where did that come from? Is that a function of society changing or becoming more aggressive, or is it a function of we're creating an environment in an airport or in an airplane that leads to aggressiveness, that leads to lack of civility? So, the question is being debated as we speak. The U.S. Secretary of Transportation thinks we should all go back to the 1950s and become more civil. That's easier said than done when you're cramming more and more people into the back of an airplane. So it is a question about, where is it that we've stepped off the wagon in the last 10 years, you're right, to kind of look at, less and less service being provided. Carriers are being much more focused on profitability. They're outsourcing a lot of the service side of it. You call the Air Canada call center and you're getting a chatbot. You're not getting a person. You're getting a chatbot, and that chatbot is going to be dealing with you very clinically. I'm not going to listen to your stories. I'm not going to listen to you whine. They're not going to listen to you cry. They're going to say, this is the offer that we're going to make, take it or leave it. So we've taken the compassion out of the communication, out of dealing with the airline and dealing with passengers. Passengers are frustrated. Passengers are upset. People are complaining. If you look at the queues in front of the CTA for air passenger protection rights, you're over 90,000 passengers sitting in a queue waiting years to have their complaint addressed by the CTA. So is the system broken? It's a term that I've been chastised on several occasions for using it, but I'll use it with you. Yeah, it is broken. We really need to have a rethink about how do we bring service back to the forefront of aviation, of airline transportation, and that is all on the airlines themselves and the airports.
We know the Trudeau government introduced new passenger protections back in 2023. We haven't necessarily seen any movement on that front from this government, the Carney government. At this moment, John, what rights do Canadian air travelers have?
Oh, you have amazing rights. If you compare the rights we have in Canada with those rights that are sitting there for U.S. passengers, we are way ahead of the U.S. We're probably just behind the EU. But we, in terms of what the paper says, in terms of what the rules say, in terms of what the regulations say, we're in pretty good shape in terms of passenger protection rights for cancellations, for delays, for baggage mishandlings, for overbookings, for all that good stuff. There are rights that Canadians have, and there are compensation regulations for passengers who get mishandled. The problem is that the industry, the airline industry, not very happy with those things. And they've been very, very negligent, in my opinion, in really, acceding to those regulations. And they're fighting the regulations. They're fighting the APPRs tooth and nail. And that's why we've got those 90,000 people, sitting in a queue at the CTA. And you probably have hundreds of other thousands of Canadians who basically have looked at that queue and said, I give up and don't bother. And so, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the number of Canadians that have been mishandled by carriers. There are hundreds of thousands of other passengers that we don't know about, and they've just given up hope of ever getting resolution. So, the APPRs are there. It's nice to look at. We salute them. We have a problem implementing them and recognizing that the carriers are not really doing a good job of meeting their expectations. So, there are two extremes on this one. One is we just give up on these rights and say, the heck with it. Nobody's recognizing them anyway. They're not doing anything. They're more of a pain in the neck. It's clogging up the court systems. It's doing all kinds. Just forget about it. Just let the carriers do a better job of managing their schedules and managing their operations and reduce delays and reduce cancellations. And that's the easy way out, but the question would be one, so how do you now further condition the airlines and the airports to do a better job of customer service? So the view is that, if you get rid of these regulations, you now have to move into what I would call regulatory reform. And it means bringing back some, the stuff that we did in deregulation. We're bringing back oversight, bringing back governance into the way in which airlines are being overseen by government, by regulation. And when you have carriers that misbehave, that you use the regulatory process and fines and all kinds of other tools that you have, administrative monetary penalties, to basically get the airlines to behave differently. But these fines, have to be meaningful. We have currently a provision within the rights that we can fine airlines $250,000 for every occurrence of a violation of the APPRs. $250,000 per occurrence, per passenger. So if I have a flight that's been delayed with 200 passengers on it, and they've been delayed and the airline is not respecting it, I can fine $250,000 for each one of those 200 passengers on board the airplane. Would that get people's attention? Yes. And would they change behavior quickly? Yes. So the question now becomes, where do we go? The the carrot approach doesn't seem to have worked with the CTA and the APPRs. So I'm saying, let's go to the heavy stick and let's, make examples of situations where, there is a very flagrant, misbehavior by an airline in terms of recognizing passenger rights, and let's hit them between the eyes.
I want to dial in on the price aspect of all of this because, across the board, prices have not only skyrocketed for tickets and for other things, but simultaneously, what that price gets you has plummeted. Air Canada removing a carry-on bag for its most basic economy fare, not even a check bag, the carry-on. What do you make of that? Why are these billion-dollar companies penny pinching customers for what seems like the most base-level travel experience?
Because there's money to be made. There's money to be made on putting those what I call junk fees. They are junk fees that, typically those are the amenities, those are the services you normally expect to be part of your basic economy fare. They were there many years ago. And the carriers have said, we're gonna fragment the business. We're gonna fragment service. We're gonna take it apart, and we're gonna take each one of those elements of service and potentially charge passengers for that service. And guess what? The industry is making a ton of money. $32 billion worth of revenue in the U.S. for junk fees last year. $32 billion. And junk fees are becoming very much the focus of attention for carriers to survive, economics of today's world. They don't make a lot of money on fares. They make a lot of money on junk fees. And they're seeing that as a free ticket to really provide differentiated services to passengers. And, our Canadian carriers are behaving in the same way. When the president of WestJet says, my job is basically to give you the cheapest possible fare and to keep our costs down. So he'll give you the cheapest possible fare for sure. But, if you want service, if you want amenities, if you want seat pitch, if you want space to put your knees into an airplane, and you want to have, a seat that, doesn't have to get reclined into your face, you can get a seat with a lot more pitch and a lot more space, but it's going to cost you an extra $50, $75, $100, depending where you're going. So they are offering you an out from the basic fare, which is really, just a seat. And they're saying, you want that service? You want seat selection? You want to carry your bags on board the airplane? You want to have 2 check bags? No problem. $300.
Literally. And not only have we seen price gouging, but it's not like we can check our competition for a better deal, mostly because there isn't that much competition here in Canada. I mean,
yeah, there is. There is. Yeah, Maria, there is competition in Canada, except you have to be in one of the big cities in Canada to get the competition. If you want to fly from Toronto,
if you're not, then what options do you have?
Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa to Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. Full stop. That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Why is it though that, to your point, people feel like our aviation scene is a monopoly?
Oh, it's a duopoly. Air Canada and WestJet have 75% of the market in Canada. So yeah, for anybody else to compete, Porter's trying. Porter's spending big bucks, big billions of dollars to bring 50 airplanes in the last 24 months, which is phenomenal. So they're trying, but it's costing them, and they're losing money for now. That hopefully they'll be able to turn the corner shortly. But they're still getting 10 airplanes a year. So they'll be up to 50 airplanes soon, 60 airplanes by the end of this year, 70 airplanes by the end of next year. So, these guys are growing, and they know that you have to have critical mass. You have to have a lot of airplanes to be able to, in fact, compete effectively against WestJet with 180 airplanes and Air Canada with 260 airplanes. So, so it really, the duopoly is strong. It's massive. They can wield a lot of market power. They can drive carriers out of business within weeks if they want to. But the government is, I would say, I don't want to use the word too flagrant, but a little complicit in this exercise. That they really aren't stepping out there in the marketplace and telling the carriers to behave differently, to understand the value of customer service. So in this latest foray with WestJet seats, and the TikTok video going around with the guy's knees and his under his throat, that should never have been allowed to happen, in my opinion. But there are no regulations. There is nothing stipulating this is the minimum size, this is the minimum seat pitch you should have on an airplane. None. So the air carriers can go to 27-inch, 26-inch pitch if they want to. Nobody's going to stop them from doing it. So at a certain point in time, the government's got to step in and say there is a minimum level of service. There's a minimum level of amenities that should be included in your basic fare. Let's establish that and let the games begin after that.
I want to discuss a report released last year by the Canadian Competition Bureau. It outlined foreign investment as one of the key ways we can improve our aviation scene. And, we are seeing that, the latest announcement with more Middle Eastern airlines being welcomed by Canadian airports. Tell us how the government can take it a step further and further loosen up restrictions on foreign capital.
Right now, the limit is 50%. Nobody can own more than 50%. A non-Canadian can own no more than 50% of an airline in Canada. That is a condition that, as far as I'm concerned, has been outlived by the world. The world has moved beyond that. That we have funds that are available globally. We have sovereign funds in Canada that can't invest in airports. We have sovereign funds worldwide that want to invest in Canadian airlines, can't do it because of these limits. So my view is that these limits are artificial limits. They have no relevance in today's open economy. That's a worldwide true trade economy. So get rid of that, and it's a bit of a bureaucracy that's creating a lot of angst in the industry. And I think that let the markets behave the way they ought to behave, and let foreign ownership, foreign funds flow into Canada. We need it.
You mentioned there that, the rest of the world has moved past that. Where does Canada right now stand in comparison to the U.S. or other countries in terms of its aviation? How do we rank?
Oh, we're pretty good. I think that, my biggest concern is safety and security. We are running one of the safest airlines and safest aviation economies in the world. NAVCAN, amazing job. Airports, they're short of capital. They're going to have to spend somewhere close to $50 billion to get their act together and take them out of the 90s and bring them into at least the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. But so there's a lot of work that has to be done on airports. They need money to do it. And AIFs, those famous charges that we pay, $35 or $45 or $55, there's no limit to those charges. So, you keep going the way we're doing, you'll be paying AIFs in Toronto close to $100 by the time we get to finishing the investment that they need to make Toronto work. So it's going to be, there's got to be a change to the business model. There's got to be a way to change the financial model. Canada has decided in its wisdom 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that it's a user pay system. And user pay means that anything if it's incurred in aviation has to be borne by the users of that system. In the U.S., very different. The U.S. says airports, airlines, airports and infrastructure are managed by the public purse, by the taxpayer. So the taxpayer, the general taxpayer, pays for air traffic control, pays for the airports, pays for investments. There are some private organizations that build terminals, but by and large, that whole infrastructure in the U.S. in aviation is paid for by the public purse. Not so in Canada. So maybe it's time for us to relook at that model and say, maybe that model worked in 1996. But, a lot of things have come and gone since 1996 when we did that. Maybe it's time to go back to a public purse model and, get off the backs of Canadian travelers, because we're paying through the nose for air travel in Canada.
All right. John Gradek, aviation expert and professor at McGill University. Thank you for your time today.
Maria, it's been a pleasure. Do this again anytime.
And that was The Big Story. As I said, this topic is no stranger to Canadians. If you have any thoughts, send them our way at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. If you like this episode, be sure to share it with a friend or a family member. The Big Story publishes new episodes every day, and don't miss our weekend listens. I'm Maria Kestane. Thanks for listening.